Guthrie. I'm still outside Nancy's house here, and there's been quite a few developments over the last 24 hours. You mentioned it. First of all, reports that the FBI now has images from other cameras on Nancy Guthrie's property. Remember, we first only saw the images in the video from the Google Nest camera right on Nancy's front door. We were wondering, because we knew there were other cameras, one on the side, one in the back near the pool, and we are learning now that the FBI was able to obtain images from those other cameras, but here's the catch. It's not video, it's actually only thumbnail images. So every time motion was detected, apparently a thumbnail image was created, and that is what the FBI has. They don't have the full images or the videos, just the little thumbnails. And we are told that anything around the time frame of when Nancy was abducted is missing, is not there, which is kind of interesting to think about why that time frame is missing. You know, there's been these questions about was there like...
The door was closed, the alarm was not triggered, the garage was sealed, and an 84-year-old woman was gone. Not gone the way people go when they walk out of their own lives. Not gone the way a person leaves when they choose to leave. Gone the way smoke disappears through a crack in a wall. No struggle, no screams heard by any neighbor, no broken furniture, no sign that anything in that house had been disturbed at all, except for one thing sitting on the kitchen counter. A small bottle of medication, the dose she took every single night of her life, untouched. Exactly where she left it before someone walked her out of her own front door in the middle of the night and into the dark. The blood came later, and it was not inside. Somewhere in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, a masked figure stood on a porch with a flashlight in his mouth and his hands covered in gloves. And he did what no one who knew Nancy Guthrie believed was possible. He got her out of that house without a sound, without a fight that anyone could see, without leaving behind a single answer that investigators have been willing to say out loud. This is not a cold case. This happened in 2026. The science is still running. The car is back, but what was found inside it has never been made public. The DNA is in a lab in Florida. The flashlight the masked man held between his teeth for 41 minutes may still carry the biological evidence that ends this entire investigation. And somewhere on a back road out of the Tucson foothills at 2:36 in the morning, a vehicle drove south toward a border that leads to a country where a family claims their mother is still alive. Before we go any further, this case involves the disappearance of an elderly woman, potential kidnapping, evidence of premeditated planning, and details that some viewers may find deeply unsettling. Please use your own judgment about whether this is something you are ready to hear right now. If you are new to the whispered crimes, this is where we stay on cases the news cycle walks away from. Subscribe now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a breakdown. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one. Now, let us go back to the night it all began. When the Pima County Sheriff's Department first responded to the call on February 1st, 2026, they did not yet know what kind of case they were walking into. By the time they did, the investigation had already grown beyond anything a single county department could contain. Within the first 72 hours, the FBI joined formally, deploying agents, analysts, and professional staff from both the Tucson and Phoenix field offices to work alongside the Sheriff's Department around the clock. On February 5th, FBI Phoenix Special Agent in charge Heath Jonka stood at the podium at the Pima County Sheriff's Office and laid out exactly what had been mobilized. The Bureau had brought in its Critical Incident Response Group from Quantico, Virginia. Members of the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team were on the ground, collecting and processing digital information from banks, social media companies, phone companies, so in any organization where a digital footprint could have been captured. Crisis negotiators from both the local FBI team and from Quantico had also been deployed. FBI Director Kash Patel, Janke confirmed, was being briefed several times a day and had a trip to Tucson already scheduled. U.S. Customs and Border Protection also joined, given the proximity to the southern border. The Pima Regional Critical Incident Team, the multi-agency group covering the broader Tucson Valley and including the Tucson Police Department, Pascua Yaqui Police, and Pima College Police, was activated. Search and rescue teams deployed drones, police dogs, and aerial resources across the Catalina foothills. From day one, this was a kidnapping investigation, not a missing persons case. Sheriff Chris Nanos became the public face of the investigation immediately. And at his earliest press briefings, he stated that evidence at the scene indicated Nancy Guthrie did not leave her home voluntarily and that investigators believed she had been taken against her will. He would not elaborate beyond that publicly, citing the integrity of the active case. On February 3rd, a source familiar with the investigation told the Associated Press that investigators had found signs of forced entry at the home, though the sheriff's department declined to confirm that detail from the podium at the time. On February 4th, President Donald Trump, following an interview with NBC journalist Tom Lamas, called Savannah Guthrie personally, offered additional federal resources, and expressed hope for Nancy's safe return. Trump also posted on social media that he was directing all federal law enforcement to assist in the search. When the White House separately posted information about the case urging the public to report anything relevant, Fox News later reported that the lead investigator assigned to the case within the Pima County Sheriff's Department had no prior homicide experience, a detail that drew sustained public scrutiny to how the department was structuring its own role at the most critical stage of the investigation. On February 5th, Janka also announced that the FBI's reward had been set at $50,000 for information leading to Nancy Guthrie's recovery or the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. He told the public to call 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit tips online. And then he looked directly into the cameras and addressed whoever was responsible. "This is an 84-year-old grandmother who needs vital medication for her well-being," he said. "You still have the time to do the right thing before this becomes a much worse scenario for you." By February 2nd, a full day before that press conference, ransom notes had already started reaching newsrooms. KOLD-TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, received the first letter by email. TMZ received a copy. CNN affiliate KGUN received one as well. The notes demanded payment in Bitcoin and set a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. Crucially, the notes provided no contact information and no way for the family to reach the sender. The same note had gone to multiple outlets simultaneously. A second note followed separately to KOLD through what appeared to be the same type of secure server as the first, Astra KOLD anchor. Mary Coleman described its contents on CNN as coherent and only slightly shorter than the original, apparently constructed to prove to investigators it came from the same person or people who sent the first letter. Janke confirmed at the February 5th press conference that one of the notes referenced an Apple Watch and a floodlight at the scene, details he said were not broadly public, and that made that particular note one the FBI was treating as more credible. The Guthrie family responded. Savannah, alongside Annie and Cameron, posted a video on February 7th stating they would pay. Savannah addressed the person or persons directly, saying the family had received the message, understood it, and would pay. When the February 9th deadline passed with no confirmed contact, Cameron Guthrie posted a solo video that evening, speaking directly to whoever held his mother, saying the family had not heard anything directly, that they needed proof she was alive, and that they were waiting for contact. No contact came. The deadline passed in silence. On the same day the reward was announced, February 5th, FBI agents moved fast on a separate front entirely. A SWAT team entered a home in Hawthorne, California, and found Derek Kallela, a 42-year-old intermediate clerk for the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. Kallela was already facing legal trouble before the Guthrie case began. In October 2025, he had been named among 13 Los Angeles County employees charged in connection with stealing approximately $430,000 in unemployment benefits between 2020 and 2023. His personal charges in that case included grand theft and a misdemeanor offense. What he did in the Guthrie case was simpler. Using a voice-over internet protocol service to generate a spoofed phone number, Kallela sent 2 text messages to Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Scioni reading, "Did you get the Bitcoin? We are waiting on our end for the transaction." He then called another unnamed family member directly. Investigators traced the messages to a Gmail account registered in his name and to an IP address tied to his California home. After agents read him his rights, Kallela admitted everything. He told them he had found the family's contact information online, had been following the news coverage, and said he was simply trying to see if the family would respond. He was charged with transmitting a ransom demand in interstate commerce, and using a telecommunications device to abuse, threaten, and harass. Released on pretrial conditions, including electronic monitoring and a no-contact order, he had no connection to the actual abduction. U.S. Attorney Timothy Corshane stated the Department of Justice would hold grief profiteers accountable. Janke added a public warning. Anyone else attempting to exploit this family would be found and prosecuted. Meanwhile, the field searches were producing activity but no arrests. On February 10th, a separate person of interest was detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, approximately 60 miles south of Tucson. The Sheriff's Department and FBI executed a search warrant on a nearby property and vehicle. By February 11th, the individual had been released without charges, and Nanos confirmed publicly he had no connection to the disappearance. 3 days later, on the night of February 13th into the early morning of February 14th, the most significant ground operation of the investigation's first 2 weeks unfolded. A Pima County SWAT team and FBI agents executed a federal search warrant at a residence near East Orange Grove Road and North First Avenue, approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. More than 24 SWAT, forensic, and unmarked vehicles were on scene. Roads in the surrounding area were closed for roughly 4 hours. A man and a woman were removed from the residence. At a nearby Culver's restaurant parking lot, a third individual was detained following a traffic stop. Law enforcement simultaneously investigated a gray Range Rover in that same parking lot, photographing it extensively, sealing its trunk, and having it towed away. Sheriff Nanos confirmed the following morning that the warrant had been based on a lead the investigation had received. No arrests were made. No one was confirmed as a suspect in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. A pair of black gloves found in a field approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home during the broader search canvassing was sent to a lab for DNA testing. The results came back negative. No match in CODIS. No match to the DNA sample recovered from the property itself. The Pima County Sheriff's Department eventually confirmed the gloves had been traced through investigative genetic genealogy to a local restaurant employee who had no connection to the investigation. By mid-March, Nanos confirmed investigators had not identified any of the clothing visible on the suspect in the doorbell footage. They were still working to determine whether the Ozark Trail backpack, a product sold exclusively at Walmart, had been purchased in a physical store or ordered online. The FBI had also amassed up to 10,000 hours of video from neighborhood cameras, traffic systems, and other sources near the Catalina foothills, with an elite team at Quantico processing that footage as a cornerstone of the ongoing probe. 3 weeks of multi-agency intensity, tens of thousands of tips, multiple search operations, 1 arrest for a fraud unrelated to the actual abduction, and still no suspect in the disappearance itself. No name, no confirmed identity, no answer. 10 days into the investigation, the public had no face. No name, no confirmed sighting. They had a missing 84-year-old woman, a blood-stained porch, a pacemaker that went dark at 2:28 in the morning, and a doorbell camera that had been deliberately disabled 22 minutes before that. What the FBI released on February 10th did not answer the central question, but it changed everything about how investigators and the public understood what kind of crime this was. On that Tuesday morning, FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 black and white still images on social media. Simultaneously, the FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department released 2 short video clips recovered from Nancy Guthrie's Google Nest doorbell camera. FBI spokesman Ben Williamson confirmed in a post that the FBI released the footage within hours of receiving it from its technical partners. The recovery process itself had taken days and had not been guaranteed. When Nancy's doorbell camera was first discovered to be disconnected, Sheriff Nanos stated publicly that investigators were attempting to work with the camera's manufacturer to recover any footage, but that she had not been paying for an active subscription that would have automatically saved video history. Without a Nest subscription, the camera's policy is to retain activity data for up to 6 hours before it expires and is overwritten. 9 hours had already passed between the camera being disabled and the family calling 911. Against those odds, the footage existed. Google's privacy policy confirmed that even without an active subscription, video data can continue transmitting to backend servers. Investigators worked with Google to extract what the FBI officially described as residual data located in backend systems. The recovery process was described by a source briefed on the investigation to CNN as so technically complex that investigators did not know whether it would be successful. FBI Director Patel told Fox News the Bureau executed lawful searches, turned to private sector companies to expedite results, and went into their systems to excavate material that people would normally assume had been permanently deleted. On February 18th, Google announced it was continuing to work to extract additional footage from other cameras at the home, beyond what had already been publicly released. What the footage showed, once the nation saw it, was not someone who panicked and covered a camera on impulse. It was the opposite. An individual wearing a full face mask, dark gloves, and a dark jacket approached Nancy Guthrie's front door, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack on his back. He had a firearm holstered incorrectly, positioned at his midsection rather than a standard carry position. He held a flashlight in his mouth, freeing both hands. He first attempted to knock the doorbell camera loose from its mount with a series of light taps. When that failed, he covered the lens with his gloved hand. When that was insufficient, he reached to a potted plant nearby, removed foliage from it, and used it to block the camera entirely. The FBI's official joint statement described this as an armed individual appearing to have tampered with the camera. Experts who reviewed the footage noted visible facial hair through the mask, indicating a black mustache. On February 12th, investigators released a formal physical description. Male, estimated 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, black mustache. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jason Pack told Fox News Digital that the suspect's behavior on that footage alone revealed something specific about the nature of the crime. Someone trying to avoid identification while also using their hands for a physical task does not improvise those decisions on the spot. Pack stated that the footage showed sophistication, the hallmark of someone who thought about this before they acted, and he noted that premeditation and planning elevate the legal severity of what investigators are examining in a kidnapping case. The suspect's visible behavior on camera was precise. But there was something in the footage that pointed to something even more deliberate than what could be seen that night. Cece Moore is the chief forensic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a laboratory whose investigative genetic genealogy work has contributed to solving more than 300 cold cases across the United States. She is one of the most credentialed practitioners in the field currently active. In an interview with News Nation correspondent Brian Entin, Moore analyzed the doorbell footage with the specific question of where the suspect's DNA might have been left behind. Her assessment pointed directly to one object, the flashlight. A flashlight held between the teeth, she explained, produces a significant transfer of saliva. DNA is hardy. It persists on surfaces well beyond the event itself. Moore said that if the flashlight was recovered from inside the home and preserved, it may be the single object in this entire case capable of converting a blurred, masked figure on a doorbell camera into a name that investigators can pursue. She also stated clearly that most DNA is invisible to the naked eye, that crime scene investigators work on trained intuition about what to swab, and that it is entirely possible the flashlight has not yet been specifically targeted for saliva. Her public recommendation: it is not too late to return to the home and swab additional surfaces. She added that the family's subsequent access to the property presents no obstacle, since the DNA profiles of all family members are known and can be computationally ruled out during analysis. Then came the detail that shifted the entire framing of the investigation in the final week of February. The FBI released 4 images when it published the doorbell footage on February 10th. Most showed the masked figure with the Ozark Trail backpack, the firearm, and the gloves. One did not. One image showed the same masked figure at Nancy's front door, wearing different attire, without the backpack, and without the holstered firearm visible. ABC News was first to report, through unnamed law enforcement sources, that the image without the backpack had been captured on a different day from the February 1st footage. The suspect had been to Nancy Guthrie's front door before the night of the abduction. CBS News confirmed the same information through a separate law enforcement source. And Fox News Digital confirmed it through an independent source as well. CNN obtained confirmation through its own channel. 4 separate newsrooms, 4 separate source networks, all pointing toward the same conclusion. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded swiftly. Their official written statement said there were no date or timestamps associated with the images, and that any suggestion the photographs were taken on different days was purely speculative. Sheriff Nanos echoed that position in a call with NBC News, though his language was notably less absolute than his department's written statement. He also confirmed to Fox News that the information about the prior visit had not originated from him or the Pima County Sheriff's Department. What he did not say was that it was wrong. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer made her own public assessment. She wrote that the family's own March 21st statement, which asked Tucson residents to focus specifically on the late evening of January 11th as one of the key dates in the case, pointed directly to the masked figure conducting what she called a trial run at the property on that date. She described it as an extraordinarily risky move and noted that if the suspect had been noticed on January 11th, the abduction on February 1st might never have taken place. CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller described the multiple visits as consistent with the investigative assumption of a planned abduction involving pre-operational surveillance and reconnaissance. Hanam investigators had already been requesting footage from neighbors specifically covering January 11th between 9 p.m. and midnight, weeks before the prior visit story broke publicly. The Sheriff's Department had asked every resident within a 2-mile radius to submit any footage from January 1st through February 2nd, with a specific emphasis on January 11th and the nights surrounding January 31st and February 1st. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News in mid-March that the reason investigators had focused on January 11th was connected to their belief that the suspect may have scouted the property on or around that date, though he noted that Google could not definitively assign a date stamp to any specific image recovered from the back-end systems. On March 21st, the Guthrie family published their own public statement. They asked the Tucson community specifically to search their memories, check their camera footage, review journal notes and text messages, and look for anything connected to 2 key windows: January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st and the late evening of January 11th. The family's decision to name that specific date publicly was a deliberate act. Families in active federal kidnapping investigations do not direct community attention to a date 3 weeks before the abduction without being guided to do so by the investigators running the case. What happened at Nancy Guthrie's front door on the late evening of January 11th has not been confirmed publicly by any law enforcement agency. It is in the investigative record. It is referenced directly by the family and indirectly by the sheriff. Or it connects to a pattern of behavior that every expert who reviewed the footage called premeditated. And it remains the one detail in this entire case that investigators have asked the public to remember while simultaneously declining to explain. The news cycle covered the footage. This channel covers what the footage means and what it still cannot explain. If you want this level of verified, detailed breakdown every time a case like this develops, subscribe to the Whispered Crimes now and turn on your notifications. You will not get this anywhere else. 2 vehicles entered this investigation within the first days of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Both were linked to the same night. Both were examined by law enforcement. They were not treated the same way, and that difference generated more public scrutiny, more expert commentary, and more unanswered questions than almost anything else in this case. The first vehicle is straightforward. Nancy's own car, a blue Subaru, was parked inside her garage on North Camino Escalante when Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni arrived at the home on the morning of February 1st. Investigators towed it from the property on February 6th. It was processed and eventually returned to the family within a standard forensic timeframe. The second vehicle is the one that kept the country talking for weeks. Annie Guthrie's blue Honda CR-V is the car her husband, Tommaso Cioni, drove on the night of January 31st to bring Nancy home from dinner. It was the last vehicle Nancy Guthrie was confirmed to have been inside before she disappeared. Shortly after the investigation began, that car was taken into law enforcement custody. It was transported for forensic processing and placed under the control of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. It did not come back for over 40 days. The reason it took that long has only recently been confirmed, and it is not what most people assumed. Before that explanation emerged, the questions kept building. On February 25th, Arizona CBS 5 true crime correspondent Brianna Whitney reported publicly that she had reached out directly to the Pima County Sheriff's Department to ask about the vehicle's status. The statement she received back was 4 words. All we can say at this time, the vehicle is still part of the investigation. That single sentence, brief and unyielding, set off a sustained round of expert commentary and public debate that the Sheriff's Department made no effort to address. On the February 27th episode of Megyn Kelly's program, former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell said publicly that it was highly unusual for police to hold on to the car of someone identified as a victim's family member for that long. She said she had processed hundreds and hundreds of cars across her career, and that investigators only keep the ones that are involved in some way, shape, or form, or have some sort of evidentiary value. She was explicit that this was not an accusation against the family. Her comments were rooted in standard investigative procedure. But the question she raised was legitimate. If the family had been cleared, why was their car still in a forensic facility weeks later? On March 10th, the investigative reporter Dave Mack appeared on the Nancy Grace Crime Stories podcast and provided the most specific public detail to that point. He reported that the Honda was at an auto mechanic facility at that moment, still in the custody of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and not in the family's possession, and that it was being put back together. On March 11th, Parade confirmed directly with a Pima County Sheriff's Department spokesperson that the vehicle had still not been returned and that the process of returning it was ongoing with no confirmed date. The real explanation for the delay came on March 19th. NewsNation's senior national correspondent, Brian Entin, who spent approximately 6 weeks reporting continuously from Tucson and tracked this story week by week on his Brian Entin Investigates program, had reported insider details on that episode. A source confirmed to Entin that Nancy Guthrie's car had not been physically dismantled the way Brian Kohberger's vehicle was during the Idaho student murders investigation. Investigators had not ripped the car apart. What they had done was attempt to download data from the vehicle's onboard electronics, and that process damaged the car's electronic systems. The sheriff's office then had to take the vehicle to a dealership to have the entire system repaired, which required ordering parts and testing, and that is what caused the extended delay. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, speaking on the same topic, was described a similar experience from her own career, where removing a vehicle's onboard system revealed a complex mesh network behind the dashboard that proved irreparable until a full replacement was ordered, tested, and installed. Bob Krygier is a former commander with the Pima County Sheriff's Department SWAT team. In an exclusive interview with Parade, he explained precisely why the electronic data from a vehicle like this is so valuable to an investigation. Modern vehicles contain extensive data through their onboard sensors and computers, covering location records, speed, and timestamps, all of which can be cross-referenced against other evidence. He also confirmed that when law enforcement takes a vehicle and that process causes damage or wear, there is a reasonableness standard in law enforcement that requires those issues to be addressed before the car goes back to its owners. The investigator's job, he said, is to create a case that is as rock solid as possible, and maintaining chain of custody on important items is part of that. Fox 10 Phoenix reported around day 68 of the investigation in early April 2026 that the vehicle belonging to Nancy Guthrie had been returned to the family. The forensic process, whatever it produced, was complete. Now the timeline sequence matters. On February 16th, Sheriff Nanos issued a formal public statement. The Guthrie family, including all siblings and spouses, had been cleared as possible suspects. He called them cooperative, gracious, and victims. He stated directly and on the record that to suggest otherwise was not only wrong, but cruel. No agency has retracted that statement. Tommaso Cioni, who had cooperated fully with investigators, passed a polygraph, and was the last confirmed person to see Nancy alive, was included in that clearance without exception. The Honda CR-V was still in forensic custody when that clearance was issued on February 16th. It was not returned until approximately early April, nearly 7 weeks later. That sequence establishes one fact with precision. Whatever evidence led investigators to clear the family did not require the vehicle's contents. The clearance came from somewhere else. Digital records, cell tower analysis, polygraph results, something that did not depend on what the car contained. The clearance and the car's return were separated by weeks. The reason for that gap has now been confirmed as a technical one involving electronic data extraction, not a forensic mystery tied to the family. Jennifer Coffindaffer is a retired FBI special agent with over 28 years in federal law enforcement, a former SWAT team member, and the host of the YouTube channel Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer FBI. On March 1st, 2026, she published a video specifically to counter the assumption that the prolonged vehicle hold implied suspicion of Nancy Guthrie or Tommaso Cioni. She said she was going to debunk the idea that the car still being in custody meant the police suspected them. She pointed to the legal distinction between a consent search and a probable cause warrant as the central evidence. Law enforcement obtained the vehicle with the family's consent, she explained, and not through a court-ordered warrant. If investigators had probable cause to believe the family was involved, she said from her experience as a federal agent, they would have gone to a federal judge for a warrant rather than asking for consent. The use of consent tells you they did not have probable cause. She also laid out the specific investigative questions a vehicle in this position legitimately answers regardless of the family's innocence. Was the car used to track Nancy from her daughter's home that night? Does it carry fingerprints or DNA from someone with no reason to have been near it? Was a tracking device placed on it before the abduction? She was not making accusations. She was mapping standard forensic logic. Las Vegas-based criminal defense attorney Peter S. Christensen, founder of Christensen Trial Lawyers, he told Newsweek in early March that the investigation overall had entered what he described as a shift from broad public outreach to more clinical evidence consolidation. When investigators say they are closer, he explained, it typically means the work has moved past sorting through mass tips and is now in the phase of digital tracing, forensic verification, and building a legally defensible timeline. Every piece of digital and physical evidence must be properly collected and preserved, he said, because procedural missteps in a case with this level of national attention can jeopardize any future prosecution. He called this the most critical stage because investigators are actively building a narrative that must eventually withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. The Pima County Attorney's Office confirmed in a late February statement that veteran prosecutors from their office were actively working alongside the Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. They cited ethical rules preventing any public disclosure of case details and directed all media inquiries to the FBI. The car came back in early April. The electronic data was downloaded before it came back. What that data contained has not been disclosed. The forensic situation in the Nancy Guthrie investigation is not a single thread. It is a biological puzzle with no existing solution, being worked on by some of the most capable forensic laboratories and genealogical scientists in the country, with new technology being accelerated specifically because of what this case exposed about the limits of current science. And understanding where this investigation stands requires understanding exactly what investigators are dealing with at the molecular level. In late February, Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the DNA situation directly in multiple media appearances. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home is a mixed profile. Genetic material from more than one contributor is present in the same biological sample. His public language to NBC News was precise. Investigators have to separate it, hope the lab can do that, and still preserve some of that evidence in case the defense wants to test it should an arrest eventually be made. He said he is hopeful the samples will get to a point where they can be submitted for investigative genetic genealogy or entered into CODIS, but that they are not there yet. He also told Fox News that investigators believe they may have some DNA in that sample belonging to the suspect, but that they will not know until the material is fully separated and sorted. The challenge is compounded by an additional layer. News Nation reporter Libby Dean reported in late February through a source familiar with the investigation that the DNA found inside Nancy's home was described as only a partial sample and was not viable for CODIS entry in its current state. That is not simply a mixed profile. It is a mixed, partial, degraded sample that falls short of the technical requirements the FBI's National DNA Index System sets for database submission. Forensic genetic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter noted in an NBC News analysis of the case that the sheriff's comments suggest the DNA ratio may have too high a proportion of victim DNA, which is the specific condition that makes separation most difficult. Genetic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick put it plainly. If the mixture is 90% Nancy and 10% someone else, that 10% may not provide enough markers for the lab to move forward toward identification. No CODIS match has been produced anywhere in this investigation. Not from the gloves recovered near the home, not from the DNA inside the residence. The Pima County Sheriff's Department stated publicly, "At this point, there have been no confirmed CODIS matches in this investigation. The absence of a match does not end the investigation. It redirects it toward different tools." Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Lance Leasing told CBS News at the 45-day mark of the investigation that without meaningful new leads, the work of sustaining investigative momentum becomes significantly harder over time. He noted that forensic genetic genealogy takes patience. The Brian Kohberger case, involving the murders of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022, was his reference point. A case where the technique ultimately worked but required weeks of careful family tree construction before investigators could identify Kohberger through a DNA connection to his father. Leasing also noted that investigators may find multiple individuals within the same DNA family who could potentially be suspects, meaning each connection identified must be independently investigated before narrowing to an arrest. Former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona, asked about the use of a private Florida laboratory in the DNA processing, noted that the FBI has the best forensic laboratory in the world and is working the case at no cost to the family. His framing was reassuring about the investigative resources available. The challenge is not capability. The challenge is the complexity of the biological material that was recovered. C.C. Moore is the chief forensic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a firm that has contributed to solving more than 300 cold cases. She addressed the technology gap in the April 9th episode of Brian Entin Investigates. Companies working with law enforcement to build DNA profiles are using whole genome sequencing, she explained. And at this point, there are really no good techniques to deconvolute complex mixtures from that methodology. But she said she believes a company that was planning to release new mixture deconvolution software has probably rushed that release forward specifically because of this case. She told Brian Entin she suspects there are a number of people working as fast as they can, trying to find a way to work with these more complex mixtures, and that Nancy's case is certainly the one making this a top priority. She added that she feared the deconvolution software may be the only tool investigators have to work with at this stage. She was equally precise about what she cannot know from the outside. She does not know how many contributors are in the mixture. She does not know what proportion of the sample belongs to the suspect. She cannot confirm that even a successful deconvolution will produce a usable sequence for this specific case. These are unknowns only the laboratory can resolve. Moore also raised a possibility that has received less public attention than the deconvolution discussion. If investigators have collected everything available from the residence, and the complex mixture remains the only forensic result, her stated hope is that a second crime scene is identified, a location where Nancy was held, the vehicle that transported her away from North Camino Escalante after the abduction. A second environment gives investigators an entirely new opportunity to collect clean, uncontaminated suspect DNA. Once she acknowledged the difficult reality directly, even if Nancy is found deceased, that discovery creates another forensic opportunity from a different environment. She said she is certain the person responsible left their DNA somewhere inside Nancy's home and has publicly recommended investigators return to the residence to swab additional surfaces. One publicly discussed lead that generated significant attention has since been resolved. On February 26th, Fox News Digital reported that neighbors Elias and Danielle Strategolias, who live approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home on a back road called Camino Real, had a Ring camera that captured 12 vehicles passing between midnight and 6 in the morning on February 1st. One vehicle passed at 2:36 in the morning, 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her phone. Retired NYPD detective and national security expert Pat Brosnan reviewed the footage with his team and assessed the vehicle as a Kia Soul based on its slanted roofline, rear quarter glass, and vertical rear brake lights. The footage was shared with the FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department. TMZ subsequently reported through a source connected to the investigation that the FBI reviewed the footage and called it a dead end. The area where the cars were driving and the ingress and egress routes led the agency to conclude the vehicles had no association with the kidnapping. That lead is closed. The investigation's leadership has also come under sustained public scrutiny at a critical stage. On April 3rd, an independent firm released findings into a workplace harassment complaint against Sheriff Nanos. The complaint was filed by Lieutenant Heather Lappin, whom Nanos defeated in the 2024 election, after he placed her on administrative leave during the final weeks of the campaign. The Arizona Republic then reported that Nanos's resume contained discrepancies. It stated he left the El Paso Police Department in 1984 when he had in fact resigned in 1982 to avoid termination. Internal affairs records showed Nanos had been suspended 8 times during his El Paso tenure, totaling approximately 37 days, for violations including excessive force, insubordination, habitual tardiness, and dereliction of duty. During a December 2025 deposition, Nanos stated he had never been suspended for disciplinary action, and a claim that directly contradicted the public records. The Pima County Deputies Union subsequently passed a unanimous no-confidence vote and called for Nanos to resign. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to invoke Arizona Statute 11-253, requiring Nanos to provide sworn testimony about his work history, leadership, and department management, giving him a deadline of April 21st. Fox News also reported that the lead investigator on the Nancy Guthrie case within the Sheriff's Department had no prior homicide experience. Board Vice Chair Matt Hines told reporters that while the Guthrie investigation's high-profile nature has focused public attention on Nanos, the board's concerns center on an accumulation of issues related to his conduct and credibility. As of April 15, 2026, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No suspect has been arrested or publicly identified. The investigation remains active and is being treated as a kidnapping. Sheriff Nanos stated in early March that investigators were definitely closer to tracking down whoever was responsible. The combined reward stands at over $1.2 million. The Guthrie family is offering $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The FBI is offering $100,000 for information leading to her recovery or an arrest. The 88 Crime Program is offering over $100,000 for information leading to an arrest. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show on April 6th. NBC producers implemented specific protocols for handling any breaking development in the case while Savannah is on air, including removing her from the set while another anchor covers the story. Anyone with information can contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit a tip at tips.fbi.gov.